In the quiet rural landscape of Kaufman County, Texas, the year 2013 began with a brutal act that shattered the community's sense of peace. The residents, accustomed to the familiar rhythms of small-town life, were suddenly thrust into a real-life horror story. Fear was a palpable thing, a cold fog that settled over the county seat and its surrounding towns. It started with a brazen daylight murder, a public execution that felt like a declaration of war. People began looking over their shoulders, wondering who could be next. The very fabric of their society, built on trust and familiarity, seemed to be unraveling thread by thread. This was not just a crime, it was an assault on the justice system itself. The terror did not stop with one murder. It escalated, growing more audacious and more personal. Just 2 months later, another attack occurred, this time claiming the lives of the county's top prosecutor and his wife, inside their own home. The message was clear and chilling. No one was safe, not even in the sanctity of their own house. The community was paralyzed by a sense of dread. Law enforcement officers, judges, and anyone associated with the district attorney's office felt a target on their backs. The question on everyone's lips was the same: who was behind this reign of terror? The initial theories pointed toward powerful, faceless organizations, a scenario that was terrifying but somehow understandable in the context of prosecutorial work. The atmosphere in Kaufman became heavy with suspicion and anxiety. The streets felt emptier, and the usual friendly greetings were replaced with wary glances. People who had known each other their whole lives suddenly felt like strangers. The murders were so professional, so cold-blooded, that they seemed to be the work of seasoned assassins. This belief added another layer of fear, suggesting that a powerful criminal enterprise had infiltrated their peaceful corner of Texas. The media descended on the small county, broadcasting the unfolding drama to a shocked nation. Kaufman was no longer just a dot on a map. It was the epicenter of a terrifying mystery that had everyone guessing. What no one could have imagined at the time was that the source of this terror was not some distant, powerful cartel or a violent prison gang. The evil that had descended upon them was homegrown, nurtured by a grudge and a burning desire for revenge. The killer was not a stranger but someone they knew, a man who had once been a part of the very legal system he was now systematically destroying. This revelation, when it finally came, would be more shocking than any conspiracy theory. It was a story of personal betrayal, of a man whose wounded pride had twisted into a monstrous and deadly obsession, proving that the most dangerous threats often come from within. The first victim was Mark Hassa, a seasoned and respected assistant district attorney in Kaufman County. On the morning of January 31, 2013, Hassa was walking from a parking lot toward the county courthouse, a routine he had followed countless times. But this day was different. A masked gunman ambushed him in broad daylight, shooting him multiple times before disappearing into the winter morning. Hassa was known for his tough-as-nails approach to prosecution and his unwavering commitment to justice. He had taken on difficult cases throughout his career, earning a reputation as a formidable opponent in the courtroom. His public execution was a message, a brutal and direct challenge to the rule of law. 2 months later, the terror returned, this time with an even more shocking blow. On the Saturday before Easter, District Attorney Mike McClelland and his wife Cynthia were found dead in their home in Forney, a town within Kaufman County. They had been shot multiple times with a powerful assault rifle. Mike McClelland was Hassa's boss and friend, a dedicated public servant who had vowed to find Hassa's killer, famously stating, "We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in." He was a pillar of the community, known for his integrity and his passion for his work. His murder felt like the toppling of a giant, leaving the county's justice system leaderless and in a state of shock. Cynthia McClelland was not a prosecutor or a lawyer. She was a nurse, a mother, and a grandmother, a woman known for her kindness and warmth. Her murder alongside her husband was a particularly cruel and senseless act, demonstrating the killer's utter lack of humanity. She was a victim simply because she was married to a man the killer hated. Her death amplified the community's horror, showing that the vendetta extended beyond the professional realm and into the personal lives of its targets. The fact that the killer had invaded a home and murdered a couple in cold blood sent a wave of fear through every household in the county. It was a clear sign that the perpetrator was driven by a rage that knew no bounds. The loss of these 3 individuals left a profound void in Kaufman County. Mark Hassa was a veteran prosecutor who brought experience and tenacity to his job. Mike McClelland was the charismatic and determined leader of the county's legal fight against crime. Cynthia McClelland was an innocent bystander, a beloved member of the community whose life was stolen in a brutal act of collateral damage. Their deaths were not random acts of violence, they were calculated assassinations. The community mourned not only the loss of 3 of its own, but also the loss of its security and innocence. The murders left scars that would take a very long time to heal. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, investigators and the public alike turned their attention to the most obvious suspects: organized crime. Mark Hassa and Mike McClelland were prosecutors who had handled numerous cases involving dangerous criminals. It was only natural to assume that their murders were an act of retaliation from a powerful group they had put behind bars. The theory that a Mexican drug cartel was involved gained significant traction. Texas prosecutors often find themselves in the crosshairs of these violent organizations, and the brutal, professional nature of the killings seemed to fit their modus operandi. It was a terrifying thought, suggesting that the long arm of the cartels had reached into the heart of a quiet Texas county. Another prominent theory pointed toward the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, a notoriously violent white supremacist prison gang. Just a few months before the Kaufman murders, the Texas Department of Public Safety had issued a bulletin warning that the gang might be targeting law enforcement officials in retaliation for a recent crackdown. The timing was suspicious, and the gang had a well-documented history of extreme violence and intimidation. The idea that this powerful and ruthless organization was behind the assassinations seemed plausible. It painted a picture of a full-scale war between a criminal syndicate and the justice system. A narrative that, while frightening, made a certain kind of sense to a community grappling with an unthinkable reality. The investigation initially explored these avenues with great intensity. Federal agencies including the FBI and the ATF joined the local and state police, creating a massive task force to hunt down the killers. They delved into Hassa's and McClelland's case files, looking for any connection to cartels or the Aryan Brotherhood. Every lead was pursued, and every potential enemy was scrutinized. The media fueled these speculations, running stories that highlighted the dangers prosecutors face from organized crime. For a time, it seemed almost certain that the answer would be found within the dark underworld of narcotics trafficking or white supremacist gangs. The community held its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation with these formidable foes. However, as the investigation progressed, these theories began to weaken. Despite the intensive search, no concrete evidence emerged linking either a drug cartel or the Aryan Brotherhood to the murders. The connections were circumstantial at best, based more on general patterns of criminal behavior than on specific proof. The investigators found themselves at a frustrating standstill. The faceless, powerful enemy they were hunting remained elusive. This lack of progress was unsettling. If it wasn't the cartels and it wasn't the Aryan Brotherhood, then who was it? The answer, it turned out, was far closer to home and infinitely more disturbing than anyone had yet dared to imagine. With the leads on organized crime growing cold, investigators were forced to reconsider their assumptions. They began to look inward, away from the sprawling criminal networks and toward the people who had personal connections to the victims. This critical shift in perspective led them to re-examine a seemingly unrelated case from the previous year, one that had involved both Mark Hassa and Mike McClelland. It was the prosecution of a local lawyer and former justice of the peace named Eric Williams. Williams had been convicted of stealing computer monitors from a county building, a crime that cost him his job and eventually his license to practice law. The motive was there, a deep, personal, and career-ending grievance. The first concrete link came from a surprising source. A friend of Eric Williams contacted the police with a chilling piece of information. Williams had allegedly confessed his plans for revenge, speaking of a vendetta against those he blamed for his downfall. This tip, combined with Williams's known animosity toward Hassa and McClelland, instantly made him the prime suspect. Investigators began to piece together a new and terrifying narrative. The killer was not a faceless enforcer for a gang, but a man they all knew, a former officer of the court who felt betrayed by the very system he once served. The focus of the massive investigation narrowed dramatically, zeroing in on Eric Williams and his wife Kim. The evidence against Williams began to mount. Investigators discovered that he had rented a storage unit in a nearby town under a false name. When they searched the unit, they found a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Inside was a white Ford Crown Victoria, the same type of car a witness had seen fleeing the scene of the McClellan murders. More damningly, they found a cache of weapons, including the .223 caliber rifle used to kill Mike and Cynthia McClellan, and the handgun used to murder Mark Hassa. The storage locker was a killer's kit, containing everything needed to carry out the assassinations. It was the smoking gun they had been searching for. The discovery of the storage unit and its contents transformed the case. The mystery was solved. The perpetrators were Eric and Kim Williams, a married couple who had plotted and executed a cold-blooded campaign of revenge. The revelation sent a new wave of shock through Kaufman County. It was one thing to be targeted by a distant criminal organization. It was another thing entirely to be hunted by a neighbor. The enemy was not an outsider but one of their own. This personal dimension made the crimes feel even more heinous. The community was forced to confront the chilling reality that the monster they feared was a man who had walked among them, his heart filled with a rage they never saw coming. Before he became a murderer, Eric Williams was a man with a promising future in Kaufman County. He was a lawyer, a graduate of Texas A&M University, and had even served as a justice of the peace, a respected position in the local legal community. He was known for his intelligence and ambition, and he seemed to be on a path to success. However, beneath this polished exterior was a man with a volatile temper and a strong sense of entitlement. He had a history of making threats and holding grudges, but for a long time, these darker traits remained largely hidden from public view. He was a man who believed in his own superiority and did not take kindly to being challenged or crossed. The turning point for Williams came in 2011. He was accused of stealing 3 computer monitors from a county IT storage room. It was a petty crime, but for a public official it was a serious breach of trust. The case was brought before District Attorney Mike McClellan, and the prosecution was handled by his chief assistant, Mark Hassa. Williams maintained his innocence, claiming he was only taking the equipment to work on it. However, surveillance video showed him taking the monitors, and a jury ultimately found him guilty of burglary and theft by a public servant. The conviction was a devastating blow to his career and his ego. The consequences of the conviction were swift and severe. Eric Williams was sentenced to probation, but the real punishment was the destruction of his professional life. He lost his position as Justice of the Peace, and more importantly, he was disbarred, meaning he could no longer practice law. For a man whose entire identity was tied up in his legal career, this was an unbearable humiliation. He lost his income, his status, and his purpose. He blamed Mark Hassa and Mike McClellan for his ruin, viewing them not as prosecutors upholding the law, but as personal enemies who had deliberately and maliciously destroyed his life. His sense of grievance festered, growing into a burning, all-consuming desire for revenge. This obsession with vengeance became the central focus of his life. He saw himself as a victim, a man unjustly persecuted by a corrupt system. In his twisted view, murder was not a crime, but a form of righteous retribution. He began to meticulously plan how he would exact his revenge on Hassa and McClellan. He enlisted the help of his wife Kim, who became his accomplice in the deadly plot. The man who once presided over a courtroom, interpreting the law, was now plotting to defy it in the most extreme way possible. His downfall was complete, not when he was convicted of theft, but when he decided that murder was the only way to reclaim his lost honor. The murders of the Kaufman County prosecutors were not crimes of passion, they were the result of cold, calculated planning. After his conviction, Eric Williams spent months plotting his revenge, transforming his rage into a detailed operational plan. He and his wife Kim worked together to gather the necessary resources for their deadly mission. They acquired multiple weapons, including the specific firearms used in the killings. They also purchased a getaway car, a nondescript Ford Crown Victoria, similar to the unmarked police cars often seen in the area, which would allow them to blend in. Every detail was considered, from the disguises they would wear to the routes they would take to escape. The first attack, on Mark Hassa, was executed with chilling precision. On the morning of January 31, 2013, Eric Williams, disguised in a dark jacket and a mask, lay in wait for Hassa near the courthouse. He knew Hassa's routine and used that knowledge to set up the ambush. As Hassa walked to work, Williams confronted him and opened fire. After Hassa fell, Williams stood over him and shot him again, ensuring he was dead. The entire event was over in seconds. Williams then fled to a waiting getaway car driven by his wife, Kim. They quickly disappeared, leaving behind a scene of chaos and a community in shock. The attack was swift, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. 2 months later, they struck again, this time targeting District Attorney Mike McClellan. Their planning for this second attack was even more audacious. On the night of March 30, 2013, Eric and Kim Williams drove to the McClellans' rural home. Dressed in tactical gear, Eric Williams kicked in the front door and stormed inside, armed with a powerful .223 caliber rifle. He gunned down Mike McClellan in a hail of bullets. Cynthia McClellan, his wife, was also murdered, a victim of Williams's merciless rage. The couple was ambushed in the one place they should have been safe. After the killings, the Williamses once again made a clean getaway, leaving behind a horrific crime scene but no immediate clues. The planning extended to covering their tracks. Eric Williams went to great lengths to create the illusion that the murders were the work of a powerful criminal organization. He allegedly sent anonymous emails to the authorities, threatening more violence and trying to point the investigation toward a drug cartel or the Aryan Brotherhood. This was a deliberate misdirection, designed to send the police on a wild goose chase while he and Kim remained hidden in plain sight. He also hid the murder weapons and the getaway car in a rented storage unit, believing they would never be found. It was a complex and devious plan, born from a mind consumed by hatred and an arrogant belief that he could commit the perfect crime. The trial of Eric Williams was one of the most highly anticipated legal battles in Texas history. Held in a neighboring county due to the intense media attention and the deep emotional impact on Kaufman, the courtroom was packed every day. The prosecution, led by a special team of lawyers, methodically laid out the case against Williams. They presented the mountain of evidence discovered in his storage unit, the murder weapons, the getaway car, and the tactical gear. They also played a chilling video of Williams confessing to the crimes, which had been secretly recorded by his wife's family. The confession was a powerful and damning piece of evidence, leaving little doubt about his guilt. The most dramatic testimony came from Williams's own wife, Kim. In exchange for a plea deal that would spare her the death penalty, she agreed to testify against her husband. On the stand, she provided a horrifying first-hand account of the planning and execution of the murders. She described how they stalked their victims, how Eric carried out the shootings, and how they celebrated after each killing. Her testimony painted a portrait of a man completely consumed by a narcissistic rage, a man who believed he was entitled to exact deadly revenge. Her words sealed her husband's fate, providing the jury with an insider's view of the conspiracy of two. The defense team had an almost impossible task. Faced with overwhelming physical evidence and the testimony of an accomplice, they could do little to argue for his innocence. Instead, they focused on trying to save him from the death penalty, portraying him as a man broken by the loss of his career and suffering from a host of psychological issues. They argued that his actions, while monstrous, were the result of a mind that had snapped under pressure. However, the jury was not swayed. The cold, calculated nature of the murders, especially the killing of the innocent Cynthia McClellan, made it difficult to see Williams as anything other than a remorseless predator. In December 2014, the jury found Eric Williams guilty of capital murder. During the sentencing phase, they heard even more evidence of his violent tendencies, including a so-called hit list that included another prosecutor and a judge. It was clear that if he hadn't been caught, his killing spree would have continued. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury sentenced Eric Williams to death. He was sent to death row, his life of vengeful violence ending with a judgment from the very legal system he had sought to terrorize. Kim Williams, for her role in the murders, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Justice, in the end, was served. The murders of Mark Hassa and Mike McClellan plunged Kaufman County into a state of unprecedented crisis. With 2 of its top prosecutors assassinated, the local justice system was in turmoil. The remaining staff at the district attorney's office were not only grieving the loss of their colleagues and friends, but were also living in constant fear for their own lives. For a time, it felt as though the county was under siege, with an invisible enemy targeting those sworn to uphold the law. The courthouse, normally a symbol of order and stability, became a fortress. Security was dramatically increased, with armed officers stationed at every entrance and patrolling the halls. The fear was not confined to the courthouse. It spread throughout the entire community. Law enforcement officials and their families felt particularly vulnerable. Police officers escorted their children to school, and many prosecutors and judges were placed under 24-hour guard. The sense of safety that had long defined life in this small Texas county was gone, replaced by a constant state of high alert. Residents locked their doors more carefully and looked at strangers with suspicion. The brazen nature of the attacks made everyone feel like a potential target. The psychological toll on the community was immense, as people struggled to cope with the violence that had invaded their peaceful lives. In response to the crisis, law enforcement agencies from across the state and the nation descended on Kaufman County. The investigation became a massive, coordinated effort involving local police, the Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the ATF. This heavy police presence was both reassuring and unsettling. While it represented a powerful commitment to finding the killers, it also served as a constant reminder of the danger that lurked. The daily news was filled with updates on the case, and the faces of Hassa and the McClellans were everywhere. The community was united in its grief and its desire for justice, holding vigils and offering support to the victims' families. Even after Eric and Kim Williams were arrested, the sense of unease lingered. The revelation that the killer was a former public official, a man who had been a part of the community, was deeply disturbing. It raised uncomfortable questions about how such evil could have gone unnoticed. The healing process for Kaufman County would be long and difficult. The murders forced the community to confront a dark truth about human nature and the potential for violence that can exist even in the most ordinary of places. The siege may have ended with the arrest of the killers, but the scars it left on the heart of the county would remain for a long time. The Kaufman County murders captured the nation's attention, becoming the subject of intense media coverage, television documentaries, and true crime books. The story was compelling because it contained all the elements of a classic thriller: dedicated public servants, a mysterious assassin, and a sprawling investigation. Shows like 48 Hours and Dateline NBC produced episodes detailing the case, bringing the chilling tale into living rooms across America. My own book, In Plain Sight, The Kaufman County Prosecutor Murders, sought to delve deep into the psychology of the killers and the impact of their crimes on the community. This widespread attention ensured that the story of Hassa and the McClellans would not be forgotten. The legacy of the case is a complex one. On a practical level, it led to a nationwide conversation about the security of prosecutors, judges, and other officers of the court. The murders served as a brutal wake-up call, highlighting the very real dangers these public servants face. Many jurisdictions across the country reviewed and upgraded their security protocols in the wake of the Kaufman attacks. The case demonstrated that threats could come not only from organized crime but also from disgruntled individuals with a personal grudge. It changed the way the legal system thinks about protecting its own, leaving a lasting impact on courthouse security procedures. However, the most profound legacy of the Kaufman County murders is not about security protocols or media attention. It is about the deeply unsettling nature of the crime itself. The initial theories of cartel or gang involvement, while terrifying, were in some ways less disturbing than the truth. There is a certain logic to a criminal organization retaliating against a prosecutor, but the reality was far more chilling. The killer was not a hardened gangster but a disgraced lawyer, a man from the same professional world as his victims. He was driven by a wounded ego and a narcissistic rage, a personal vendetta that spiraled into a murderous rampage. This is the ultimate horror of the Kaufman County story. It is a tale of personal betrayal. Eric Williams was not an outsider. He was an insider who turned on his own. His crimes show that the most frightening monsters are not always the ones who lurk in the shadows of the criminal underworld. Sometimes, they are the people we know, the neighbors we greet, the colleagues we work alongside. The story serves as a stark and terrifying reminder that evil can wear a familiar face. It reminds us that the line between order and chaos, between reason and rage, can be terrifyingly thin, and that the deepest wounds are often inflicted by those who were once closest to us.